Luke Fickell can absolutely win at Wisconsin, but he has to make better hires than he has so far.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. Thank you for being here. I'm your host, Ryan Harings, as always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for being every day. Or today's episode, we were talking about Luke Fickell and why he's the guy, but just that couple poor hires have really derailed it all. What's realistic this year? Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Let's talk about this. So, a while ago, Athlon came out with their preview magazine, right? Previewing the Badgers and every other team in college football. I always used to love those preview magazines. I'd sit in the grocery store and thumb through them. And they have a part where it's anonymous quotes from Big Ten coaches. So a fellow Big Ten coach was talking about the Badgers. And this came out a while ago, and I wanted to talk about it, but I was on travel and I filed it away. And I said, I'm going to get to that because I think this is super interesting. The quote from an anonymous Big Ten coach on the Badgers, quote, Luke Fickell is the guy. But the offensive issues have overshadowed the overall plan so much, it's easy to see why some folks may lose faith. I think they just overreached on trying to modernize the program schematically, end quote. Let's start with that first part. Quote, Luke Fickell is the guy. Again, from another coach in this conference that sees the Badgers, that game plans for them, that has connections. I think it's very interesting. It's incredibly easy in the world we live in to lose patience in all things, not just sports. We are a little quicker to judge, a little quicker to dismiss, a little quicker to get excited as well. You know, on both ends of the spectrum, I think we're quicker to jump to all sorts of conclusions and decisions. A couple of years ago, Luke Fickell was the crown of the party. That hire was hailed as a home run by upper 90th percentile of Badger fans and national media. Absolute home run. What a hire by the Badgers. And 2 years later, a lot of people are like, man, I don't know. I think there's a big chance this thing was just a really poor offensive coordinator decision. And we have all, think about your friends, think about family, coworkers, think about yourself. Think about somebody that was just in a really bad relationship and how that just drug it down. And it's not a bad relationship in terms of Luke Fickell's a bad guy, but schematically the fit. You can get drugged down by a bad relationship choice and you're not going to show your best self. I think that's a big part of what this is. The quote goes on, I think they just overreached on trying to modernize the program schematically. Yeah, I think so. Right? I think so. It goes on, quote, Jeff Grimes is a great hire. They flipped the entire offense except for their backs. They need to go back to Wisconsin football this season, and they've got a young backfield that can do it. The focus here is on offense. It was a hard sell for a program like this to embrace a system like Phil's, and it ended up being a mismatch because of personnel. Again, a lot of coaches in conference just saying, hey, that was just a really bad decision at offensive coordinator, but everything else feels like it can work there. And it might be as simple as that to some degree. We're going to get to defense in a second, but it might be as simple as that was a categorically disastrous hire for the program. And that's on Luke Fickell. Okay. Hiring the offensive coordinator is on the head coach. That's on Luke Fickell. It is what it is. But once you make a decision, and if it's the wrong one, you got to move on. You got to move on and change. And they did that. So they pretty quickly moved on from what was a mistake, a bad hire, a bad schematic fit, whatever it is. They moved on from that. And you go back to the original quote here from that Big Ten coach, Luke Fickell is the guy. So if the biggest impediment to all this, if the biggest issue to all this was a poor offensive coordinator decision, which again, that's on Luke Fickell. If you're the captain of the ship, the lieutenant commanders underneath you are your charge. But he's addressed that. That's been fixed. And now we can go back to hopefully seeing the reason that Luke Fickell was the belle of the ball, the reason that he was a home run hire, and the reason these other coaches are talking about, hey, Luke Fickell's still the guy. You talk to people who interact with him, other coaches, he still has that gravitas to him. And I think very likely Wisconsin has removed the biggest fly in the ointment here. And again, this is not a personal shot for long. Sometimes things just don't work. Sometimes personnel, scheme, schematics. Sometimes there's just mismatches, and talented people can go to places and not succeed because it's just not the right fit. And it feels like that's what happened here. And I wonder if we've lost sight of maybe the simplest answer is the correct one. And it was just a bad fit at offensive coordinator. This offense was horrific. It was so bad. And we can focus on defense and what they did or didn't do. It's complementary football. If your offense is really bad, if it's 3 and out a lot, if it doesn't score a lot of points, it puts so much pressure on, on a defense that wasn't great. That wasn't a great defense, but the offense put so much pressure on them. It's almost a no-win situation. So fixing that a little bit, I think could go a long ways to rejuvenate or to kind of reinvigorating Badgers fans on Luke Fickell, because that is probably the biggest issue here. And I've talked about it. We have all been in relationships or seen people in relationships that just don't work. And when it doesn't work, it can drag everything down. You go continue on this quote. Jeff Grimes is a great hire. Again, from an anonymous Big Ten coach. Jeff Grimes is a great hire. They flipped their offense, except for the backs. They need to go back to Wisconsin football, and they've got a young backfield that can do it. That should give you hope. I mean, this guy has nothing to gain. This is an anonymous quote from another Big Ten coach. Jeff Grimes is a great hire. When you talk to people, like, there is a palpable amount of excitement for Jeff Grimes for what he wants to do schematically. I think the fit with the personnel at Wisconsin is going to be a lot better. I think he's going to fit better with what Luke Fickell wants to do. I think you have alignment. Probably for the first time since Luke Fickell has been here, I think you have real alignment in that coaching staff, in that coaching room. And alignment can help tremendously with the type of players you recruit, how you develop those recruits, how you sell the scheme, how the offense and defense works together. It's a big deal. Again, go back to your own experience. How many times have you been in an office space or a work environment or a company or an organization where you felt like the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand? And everybody's good peeps, like good people, but if you're not communicating and you're not on the same page with how you want to do things, it stinks. We've all been in toxic work environments. And again, I'm not saying that's what that was. I'm absolutely not, and not throwing any shade on Phil Longo, the person, but it doesn't feel like the left hand was talking to the right hand. And that's what these coaches that watch the Badgers and prepare for them, that's what they're saying as well. It continues going. I think the extra pressure here in year two, quote, is because they didn't score any points last season. They got away from an identity that worked so well in this league. Yeah, they went too far. I think they talked about it. I think they overreached in trying to modernize the program. And Luke Fickell probably bit off more than he can chew year one. Let's come in here and let's completely brand new coaching staff, brand new recruiting department. We're going to completely change this offensive system. We're going to go to a new defensive system, and we're going to learn the state at the same time. And we're going to take over the middle of a recruiting class. I think it's too much. I think they overreached. I think they bit off too much, more than they could chew, to try to generate excitement around the program and the launch. And I think there's a lot of things they would have done differently. Coming in, I think they would have looked at the roster a little more critically. I think they would have kept more alignment with some ties in the state of Wisconsin. I think they would have approached that first class differently. But all that's in the past. There's nothing you can do about that now. So you move on, and it sounds like, again, from inside the program and from a lot of people outside the program, Jeff Grimes feels like a really strong hire for this program. And I still think Luke Fickell can be the guy. I think he can win here. I think everything that made him that really desirable coaching candidate is still there. That doesn't go away in 2 years. So call me an optimist if you want. I think this can work. I think Fickell can still be the guy, to the point of this Big Ten coach that's talking about this program. I don't see any reason why he can't. And I'm excited to see what Jeff Grimes can do with this offense this year. I'm excited to see what complementary football can look like in Wisconsin again, because that was missing last season. All right, we're going to take a break here, come back, and we're going to talk about I'm going to tell you why I don't think the defense was as to blame last year as a lot of people think it was. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick second for our friends of the show over at Monarch Money. Monarch Money is incredible. If you need a spot to manage all your money, and I know a lot of us do, because it can be stressful to manage all your money with all your different accounts, bank accounts and mortgages and credit cards and investment stuff. Monarch Money brings all that together, like a great huddle in football. Bring all the key players together and let's figure out what's going on. You can collaborate with your partner. It is a incredible tool. It's like a personal CFO that gives you a dashboard of all your money, your goals, tracks your investments, tracks your spending, helps you find maybe some things that you're spending too much money on, or some things that you forgot you're spending money on to save you some extra dough. Monarch Money is absolutely phenomenal. And right now, you can take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. It is incredible. It's something I use. You will not regret it. Okay, let's talk about the defense here, because I think a lot of people look back at last year and they just see failure everywhere. They see failure defensively, they see failure offensively from a coaching standpoint, from outside of probably recruiting. You lost to your rivals, you got blasted by Iowa, and it's really hard to look back at last year and say, well, maybe that wasn't as bad as we thought. So again, going back to that quote from an anonymous Big Ten coach, quote, defensively, we expect them to be much improved. I'd say they're on a similar timeline to what Luke Fickell did at Cincinnati. That's not the side of the ball to worry about here. What is Luke Fickell's roots, right? Defensive coordinator. That's a spot that they brought in extra help, another DC. They have more minds in that room. And if you look statistically back at last year, you look at what this defense did. We know the warts. We're going to talk about that in a second. But they were 42nd nationally in scoring defense last year. The Wisconsin Badgers were 42nd nationally is not bad. Brett Bielema had years where they were that. Paul Chryst had it's not great. But if I told you the Badgers, I think if I talked to an average Badgers fan, I said, hey, where do you think the Badgers finished nationally in points per game allowed last year? I think a lot of people who really follow the program would say, I don't know, 60th, 70th. We couldn't hit the quarterback. No, they finished 42nd. They averaged 23.1 points allowed per game. They held Oregon down. They were competing with Penn State. And that was, kind of ballooned by that 42-point game against Iowa, which still counts, obviously. But against a tough schedule, they gave up 23 a game. That's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. Third down defense, they were ninth in the Big Ten, eighth or ninth in the Big Ten. They were a solidly mediocre defense. The issue was offense. Again, the issue was offense, which we talked about previously. We talked about Longo and moving to Grimes and how that can fix a lot of what ailed this program. The defense was okay last year. Now, the two big issues, it was rush defense and it was, destructive plays. The ability to create negative plays, tackles for losses, sacks, hitting the quarterback, interceptions, those chaotic plays that can flip a game. Yeah, Badgers were terrible at that last year. They were terrible at rush defense, 4.63 yards opponent attempts per carry. That was 17th in the Big Ten, 16th in the Big Ten in terms of essentially rushing defense efficiency. And they couldn't hit the quarterback. And yet, despite those things, and yet despite those obvious flaws and warts that we've talked about, they weren't statistically that terrible overall. They were okay. And what have the Badgers done to address those two biggest flaws? Again, the two biggest flaws they had, rush defense. What'd they do? They brought in Perk. They brought in Gardner. They brought in a bunch of 300-pounders, quite frankly. You look at all these pieces, these large human beings that they brought in. That's what they did to address it. And I'm not even, obviously, there's more than that. There's more pieces that they brought in. So they're adding a ton of bulk, a ton of size, pieces that they didn't have last year, specifically to address that interior defense, that defensive line rotation. You get Dylan Johnson back from last year, who played as a true freshman. He's bigger. I think he's going to factor into it. Jamel Howard sounds like he's taken a step. The rush defense should be better. You have Christian Allegro, who's going to be taking a step forward. Tackett Curtis is going to be playing. And then the other one is the TFLs, the sacks, right? The ability to hit the quarterback. What did they do to address that? Well, you brought in Mason Reiger, who I think he's going to play this year. That's an injury question. But let's just say he plays this year. That's a better pass rusher than anything you had last year by far. It just is what it is. He instantly becomes, I think, one of the better pass rushers you potentially had the last couple of years, because you've seen him do it at Louisville. You've seen the Reiger Tiger unleashed in a real conference against real teams, and he's be productive. If he's healthy and ready to go situationally, that's a big deal for the Badgers. Then you're bringing in Nicholas Clayton, who I'm telling you right now, Nicholas Clayton may be the best pass rusher on this team this year. He may be the best from an outside burst pass rushing standpoint. He may be the best guy on this roster. So you've done a lot to address the two biggest issues on the defense last year. And we've already talked about the defense was okay last year. So if they take a step forward in rush defense, they take a step forward in the ability to hit the quarterback, the ability to create some negative plays, What does that mean for the rest of the defense? What does it mean complementary for the offense? If you get a couple more early stops on defense, now the offense takes over. And this is where we talk about Jeff Grimes and this offense's ability to play complementary football. Now, with their running game, they can wear on opposing defenses more. You can flip the field more, right? You can wear out the other team's defensive line more because your defense is getting off the field. And then what does that do to your defense? Your defense stays fresher, right? Your defense is able to hold up better against rushing attacks in the second half because that's a lot of what we saw last year. We saw a lot of teams wear the Badgers out. We saw a lot of teams wear down a defensive line rotation that, quite frankly, wasn't deep enough. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't physical enough. It wasn't strong enough. Will it work this year? We'll have to see, but they've taken steps to address that. And you've taken steps, I think, to play more complementary football, which is what Jeff Grimes is going to do, which is what Phil Longo couldn't do. To tie it all together, it felt like there were almost two separate teams last year. There was an offensive team playing its own style and a defensive team playing its own style, and coaches heading up both. It didn't feel cohesive. Just talking to some people around the program, that's something that they would say as well, I think. It didn't feel cohesive. It didn't feel like it made sense. It felt like the left hand wasn't talking to the right. And I think you've aligned that this year. I think having Longo move out, like step away. Again, I'm never going to take personal shots on anybody. Longo knows more about football than I ever will, but it just wasn't a fit. And bringing in Coach Grimes, well, also not like, there's some question marks with Coach Grimes as well in his last couple stops, but the context matters, and what he likes to do schematically fits really, really well with what Wisconsin likes to do, with what Wisconsin wants to do. And I think that's going to complement the defense that can now stop the run, hopefully a little bit better, and get after the quarterback. That's what this whole offseason was about. If you zoom out, right, and so many things happen in an offseason, so many things with recruiting and transfer portals and the coaching carousel and all the craziness with NIL and legislation and NCAA committees and Xavier Lucas and what the heck happened this offseason. At its core, it was finding the right fit at OC, getting a stable quarterback, and adding bodies to the front seven. That's what this offseason was. That's what this offseason was about. It was about stability on offense, which is Grimes and Billy Edwards, and then beef on defense, which is all those guys we've talked about, Suggs and Perkins and Gardner, and Barton comes back bigger, Dylan Johnson comes back bigger, and again, I'm leaving some people out. Mason Reiger comes in, and Tanya and Tarian Turner, and Sebastian Cheeks is going to be better, and you had Nicholas Clayton, and now you have a full year of Christian Allegro, and Tackett Curtis is back healthy. I think that front seven is going to be better. How much better? Will it be elite? Will it be great? I think you're still missing probably another piece on the other edge of Reiger, unless Reiger can be completely healthy and play a ton to be great. But I think they'll be good. I think they'll be solid. And both of those adjectives were missing from last year's defense, good and solid. I think it'll be deep. Another one that's missing from last year's defense. So I'm excited to see like how all of this can work together in a more complementary way, because that's so much of what football is. You have to complement each other offensively. Your line has to complement your running backs, which complements your quarterback, and et cetera. But you also have to just holistically, as a big picture, the offense and defense have to complement each other. I think they're going to be better at that this year. All right, take a second here for our friends. But I'm going to come back and tell you what's realistic this year, not just from a wins and loss standpoint, for this tough schedule. Still a lot of pieces shuffling in and out. What's realistic for the Badgers football team this year that would make Badger fans feel better about this program? Coming up next, Locked On Badgers. Also, as always, man, I want to take a quick second to say thank you for tuning into Locked On Badgers. Thank you for being a part of this. If you want to join the Discord, the Locked On Badgers Discord, you can scan that QR code down there, or just search me up on X, Twitter, whatever you got. And the Discord link is in there. Come join us, talk Badgers. It's a great place. What's realistic this year? So I put this question in Discord. I did it early, so I didn't get a ton of feedback. But this is from Marine Matt. Year 3, you should be able to beat Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Iowa. That should be the barometer. Probst, success this year is having an identity, something you can recruit with, something you can win with. The only way to have that identity is by maximizing your talent. Love both these answers. I want to start with this one, because that last sentence is, I think, what was missing with this program to some degree last year, especially offensively. Maximize your talent. It just schemed into it, right? It felt like we kept hitting our head into a brick wall with this scheme, and it was simplistic, and it felt like you needed better pieces in places. There wasn't a whole lot of scheme flexibility to free people up and to make defenses think, to get a defender shifting in one direction and hit them on the other side. I think the scheme is going to, again, going back to that Jeff Grimes scheme, it's going to maximize our talent significantly more than Phil Longo was able to do, because we have to create a few more advantages offensively, and we have to scheme a few more people open offensively, because this is not Ohio State. It's not Alabama. It is a place where you have to use your pieces tactically a little more intelligently. And I think Grimes, with his movement, his receivers coming across the motion, his reliance on tight ends, his ability to create some easy looks for his quarterbacks, I think all that's going to play really well for Wisconsin. I think it's going to help maximize our talent. So I love that. In general, I love this whole quote from Probst. Again, we talked about identity a lot. We've talked about culture a lot. And that's what he said. He says, this year is a success if you reestablish that. If you reestablish what this program can look like, if you look cohesive, if you look like the pieces are coming together, those last two recruiting classes that we thought really highly of, if those are starting to play impactful roles, all of that goes into identity. Going back to that Wisconsin program that is going to recruit, identify, develop, and then play tough. That's a big part of what this year is. Can you get back to selling the vision, right? Can you get back to showing what this program is, what it can be, and then turn that into something you can recruit to? I think this Probst quote is awesome. And then Maureen Madigan, year 3 should be able to beat Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Iowa. Yeah, that's true. And then maybe not all of them. But when you look at where this program was and is historically, and compared to where Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa are and were historically, in year 3, you should be winning the majority of these games. Now, you never bat 1,000 in college football. You almost never bat 1,000 against the teams you should win. That's just how college football works. Like occasionally the 7-point underdog is going to trip you up. That's college football. But man, you got to beat most of these teams, because it's a major uphill battle for the Oregons and the Ohio States and those guys. So I think this is fair as well. Year 3, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa. What's the record there? Can you go 3-1? It's probably unrealistic to go 4-0 against that group, but can you go 3-1? I think so. And that would be it would be nice to get some more trophies in the trophy case again. It would be glorious to beat Minnesota and reestablish who the top dog in that rivalry is. I'll give you another one that I think is realistic this year. And I think it's defensively, I think it's realistic to see what Coach Tressel can do and achieve with an actual front seven that has depth. I think that's another one. If you come out of this year, and we got to see which way that goes, right? If you come out of this year and it's pretty close to last year, where this defense just can't create any TFLs, any sacks, then you really got to look at coaching, because that's a couple years now where transfers and incoming talent hasn't made a difference in the actual on-field results. But I kind of think at the end of this year, you're going to look at it and say, oh, wow, they were able to hit the quarterback more this year. They did get some TFLs, and you're going to look back and say, you know what, last year was probably just they didn't have the bodies. I think that's what's going to happen. I think they're going to look back after this season and say, last year, the defense was okay. We talked about it, but the reason they couldn't get pressure wasn't a scheme thing. It was they just didn't have the bodies. I think this year you have more bodies. You're going to get more pressure. Sometimes it's as simple as you need dudes. Sometimes it's as simple as you need more guys on the chessboard that can impact the game. And once you do that, it makes coaching a heck of a lot easier. I mean, Captain Obvious, thank you. But that's what Ohio State coaches talk about. That's what, Kirby Smart talks about. You need dudes. That's what Nick Saban would always talk about. And I don't think they had enough of them last year. I think they have more of them this year. I don't think we are where we need to be an elite program, certainly. But I think they have more of them this year. And I think we're going to be able to take something out of that positively at the end of the year. So appreciate everybody tuning in. Really, really thankful, as always, for the community. Let me know what you think is realistic this year, and we'll talk about that on a future show. On Wisconsin, as always, appreciate you guys, and we will definitely talk later.